Stand on almost any street corner in the British capital today, and you are surrounded by a densely packed metropolis of 9 million people. Nearly 40% of the residents walking past you were born outside the United Kingdom, speaking over 300 different languages. Rewind 2,000 years, and that exact same spot looks entirely different. It is an empty, tidal marshland. There are no people, no structures, just a useless patch of mud along a widening river. The Romans eventually found a use for it, establishing a thriving trading post called Londinium. But less than 2 decades later, Queen Boudicca's rebel army marched in and burned the entire settlement to the ground. If you dig beneath London today, you will still find a thick layer of red ash from that initial destruction. The Romans rebuilt, only to permanently abandon the island around 410 AD as their empire fractured. Without Roman military protection and continental trade networks, the local economy collapsed. The merchants left, the currency became worthless, and the city completely emptied out. For centuries, the massive stone walls sat empty. When Anglo-Saxon farmers eventually settled the area, they actively avoided the ruins. They believed these colossal, decaying structures were cursed, describing them in their poetry as the work of giants. A settlement that was burned to ash, economically starved, and left for dead by its founders somehow managed to claw its way back to become the center of a global network. In the mid-1300s, ships carrying rat fleas infected with the bubonic plague docked in the city. Within 2 years, the Black Death killed up to half of the population. Mass graves filled the surrounding fields, and entire streets were abandoned. This map shows how the survivors inherited a dangerous architectural pattern. Thousands of timber houses with dried thatch roofs were crammed together, their upper floors extending so far over the narrow streets that they nearly touch across the gap. In September 1666, a spark in a Pudding Lane bakery ignited that wooden tinderbox. Fanned by strong winds, the Great Fire burned for 4 solid days, incinerating 85% of the walled city and leaving 100,000 people homeless. Rebuilding was an urgent necessity. Planners proposed sweeping, geometric grids, but individual property rights were too complex to unravel. They kept the chaotic medieval street patterns, but the government mandated strict new building regulations, requiring structures to be built from durable brick and stone. Architect Christopher Wren anchored this new masonry capital by designing a massive stone-domed replacement for St. Paul's Cathedral. By replacing timber with stone, London moved past the constant cycle of incineration and rebuilding. It finally had the physical permanence required to house the massive banks and insurance markets that were beginning to organize the city's expanding global wealth. The Industrial Revolution then supercharged that growth. Factories, mass production, and a booming global empire swelled the population from 1 million in 1801 to over 6.5 million by 1901, making it the most populated city on Earth. But that explosive expansion created severe social compression.
While imperial elites lived in high comfort in Mayfair, the working poor were pushed into hyper-dense, squalid conditions in the East End slums. Cramming millions of people together without adequate sanitation caused the city's biology to break down. Contaminated water triggered mass cholera outbreaks that killed tens of thousands. By 1858, raw sewage in the river produced the Great Stink, an odor so overpowering that Parliament had to suspend its sessions. The solution required massive public engineering. Joseph Bazalgette designed and built a vast underground sewer network that actively channeled waste away from the central water supply. At the same time, engineers began excavating deep trenches straight through the urban center to construct the world's first underground passenger railway, a measure to relieve the completely gridlocked surface streets above. The Victorians demonstrated that catastrophic biological and spatial failures could be solved by digging beneath the problem. They laid down the physical infrastructure that modern global metropolises still rely on today. Less than a century later, the city faced ruin from above. Between September 1940 and May 1941, German bombers pounded the capital nightly during the Blitz, leveling entire neighborhoods and damaging or destroying over 1 million buildings. Amid the smoke and falling masonry, a few key structures held their ground, standing as symbols of endurance for a city under siege. Even after the war was won, the capital was a bleak place in the 1950s. The empire was bankrupt,
rationing was strictly enforced, and the air was choked with dense, toxic coal smog that killed 12,000 people in a single 5-day stretch. Exhausted and short-handed, the city required a demographic rescue. The government called upon citizens from across the collapsing empire. The Windrush generation arrived from the Caribbean, followed by waves of immigrants from South Asia and beyond, stepping in to run transport networks and rebuild the bombed-out public services. This injection of new people and diverse cultures ignited a rapid musical and cultural resurgence. By the 1960s, the grim post-war rubble had given way to a vibrant explosion of fashion and youth culture. When the city's physical architecture was leveled and its imperial wealth drained, it survived by importing human diversity, using an influx of global citizens as its primary mechanism for rebirth. Look at the skyline today, and you can see this history compressed into a single view. 21st century glass and steel financial towers sit directly beside medieval stone fortresses and post-fire cathedrals. The capital does not function as a preserved, untouched museum. It is a constantly overwritten landscape, a place where new structures are built on top of the remains of the old. The invasions, plagues, and fires that should have ended the city instead became the blueprints for its next iterations, forcing it to adopt more resilient architecture and more sophisticated systems to survive. 2,000 years of survival prove that this city's ultimate strength is its capacity to absorb destruction, break down the old, and reinvent itself through new ideas and new people.